The spring of 1815 brought no relief to Amelia Thornton. Only questions. Always questions. "And where is Mr. Thornton this evening?" Lady Pemberton asked, her fan clicking shut like a trap. "Still traveling?" The word hung in the air of Lady Weatherby's ballroom, dripping with suspicion. Around them, silk rustled as heads turned. Amelia felt the familiar heat rising to her cheeks, the weight of 36 stares settling on her shoulders like stones. "My husband's business affairs keep him abroad," Amelia replied. "The practice lies smooth as glass and just as fragile. He sends his regrets." "Of course he does." Lady Pemberton's smile was thin and sharp. "How very convenient. 6 months of marriage, and we've yet to meet the mysterious Mr. Thornton. One does begin to wonder." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Amelia stood frozen as the whispers began, spreading through the crowd like water through cracked stone. Around her, faces that had once been merely indifferent now wore expressions ranging from pity to contempt. "Poor thing," someone murmured behind a fan. "Father died leaving nothing but debts. Brother gambling away what little remained. She probably invented a husband to avoid the shame of remaining unmarried at 24. I heard," another voice joined in, "that there never was a wedding, that she simply disappeared to the country for 6 months and returned claiming to be Mrs. Thornton." Amelia's hands trembled. She clasped them tightly together, willing herself not to flee, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The truth was somehow both better and worse than their speculation. There had been a wedding. There was a husband. For exactly 3 days. Then Geoffrey Thornton, the charming gentleman who had saved her from poverty and scandal, had simply vanished. No note, no explanation, just an empty bedchamber and a marriage license that proved she was legally bound to a ghost. "Mrs. Thornton." The voice that cut through the whispers was deep, cold, and unmistakable. "I believe you promised me this dance." The entire ballroom fell silent. Amelia turned slowly, disbelieving. Standing before her, tall and imposing in impeccable evening dress, was Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, the most feared man in England, the Duke whose very name made debutantes pale and their mothers scheme, the man whose cold green eyes had once looked at her across a card table and saw right through to her soul. "Your Grace," she whispered, confused. I did not." "You did." His hand extended, not a request but a command. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "Come." She placed her hand in his because every eye in the ballroom was watching, because refusal would create an even greater scandal, because something in his expression told her this was not a suggestion. As he led her onto the dance floor, he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Pretend you're mine," he murmured, "and they will never question you again." 6 months earlier, Amelia Thornton had been Amelia Hartley, and her world had ended. Her father, Thomas Hartley, had been a gentleman of modest means and immoderate gambling habits. When he died suddenly of apoplexy, he left behind a townhouse mortgaged to its foundation, debts that exceeded the value of everything he owned, and 2 children who suddenly discovered they had nothing. Amelia had faced the reality with the grim practicality that came from years of managing her father's household while he drank and wagered away their future. Her brother, James, had not. At 19, he was too young, too proud, and too much like their father. Within weeks of the funeral, he had begun gambling himself, convinced he could win back their fortune. "You don't understand, Amelia," he had insisted, pacing the drawing room while creditors knocked at the door. "I've been practicing. I have a system. Father was careless, but You are exactly like Father," Amelia had said quietly, "and you will destroy us both." She had been correct. Within 3 months, James had gambled away the last of their mother's jewelry, sold the furniture, and incurred debts to men who did not politely send letters but came in person with threats. Amelia had realized with cold clarity that she had 2 choices: find a husband immediately, or face ruin so complete that even respectable poverty would be beyond her reach. The marriage mart, however, had no use for a penniless gentleman's daughter of 24 with a gambling brother and no dowry. The few suitors who had shown interest in her youth had long since married girls with fortunes and better connections. Then Geoffrey Thornton appeared that he had been handsome in a careless way, charming, well-dressed, with easy manners and a comfortable income from investments in shipping. He had encountered Amelia at a card party, one of the last she was invited to before her father's debts became common knowledge, and had seemed genuinely taken with her. "You have an honest face, Miss Hartley," he had told her, dealing the cards with practiced ease. In a world of pretense, that is remarkably refreshing. He had called on her. He had taken her driving in Hyde Park. He had been attentive, kind, and when he proposed after only a month of courtship, Amelia had accepted with relief that bordered on gratitude. "I know this is sudden," Geoffrey had said, taking her hands in his, "but I am a man who recognizes value when he sees it. You are wasted in this half-life of poverty and social exile. Marry me, and you will never know what you want again." It had not been a love match. Amelia had been honest with herself about that. But Geoffrey had seemed genuinely fond of her, and she had believed, foolish girl, that fondness could grow into something deeper. The wedding had been small, conducted by special license at St. George's, Hanover Square. James had been there, sober for once. A few elderly relatives had attended. Geoffrey's man of business had witnessed. Their wedding night had been awkward but not unkind. Geoffrey had been gentle, patient, murmuring reassurances when she tensed. He had held her afterward, stroking her hair, telling her she had made him very happy. The next morning, she had woken to find him gone at first. She had assumed he had risen early. Men had business to attend to, after all. But as the morning stretched on and he did not return, a cold unease had begun to settle in her stomach. By evening, she had sent for his man of business, only to discover that Geoffrey Thornton had no man of business. The address he had given her for his London residence did not exist. The shipping investments were fiction. Even his name might have been false. The marriage, however, was devastatingly real. Amelia had stood in the modest rooms Geoffrey had rented for their brief residence, holding the marriage license in hands that would not stop shaking, and understood with perfect, terrible clarity that she had been swindled. She had spent weeks trying to trace him, hired a runner with money she did not have, discovered that Geoffrey Thornton, if that was even his real name, had a pattern. He married women of modest means, spent a few days establishing the marriage was legal, then vanished with whatever jewelry, money, or valuables they possessed. In Amelia's case, he had taken very little because she had very little to take. Her mother's wedding ring, the few pounds she had saved, her virtue and her future. The runner had been blunt. "You're the 5th woman I've found, ma'am. Maybe the 10th he's actually wed. You won't find him. Men like that, they know how to disappear." Amelia had paid him his fee and dismissed him. Then she sat in the empty rooms and made a decision. She could not dissolve the marriage. That would require finding Geoffrey or proving the marriage invalid, neither of which seemed possible. She could not remarry. She was legally Mrs. Geoffrey Thornton until death or divorce freed her, and both seemed impossibly distant. But she could pretend. She could return to London, claim her husband was traveling on business, and use the respectability of marriage to protect herself from complete social ruin. It was a desperate gambit, a lie that would eventually unravel, but it bought her time. Time to think, time to plan, time to survive. She had returned to London 6 weeks after her wedding, taken modest lodgings with the last of her funds, and begun the exhausting performance of being a married woman whose husband was perpetually absent. For 3 months it had almost worked. She attended smaller social gatherings, always explaining Geoffrey's absence with vague references to business abroad. She was careful never to claim too much about his connections or wealth. She simply existed in the margins of society, trying to be unremarkable enough to avoid scrutiny. Then the invitations had grown more prestigious. The questions were more pointed. And tonight, at Lady Weatherby's ball, the pretense had finally begun to crack. Until Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, the man society called Winter for his cold demeanor and colder heart, had claimed her for a dance and whispered words that made no sense but felt like salvation. The waltz was a torment of proximity and confusion. Alexander Blackwood moved with the assured grace of a man who commanded everything he touched. His hand at her waist was firm but not constraining. His other hand held hers with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his reputation. "Your Grace," Amelia managed, trying to match his steps without stumbling. "I don't understand. Why would you? Do you want them to stop asking questions about your absent husband?" He interrupted, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Amelia's breath caught. "Yes, but then allow me to provide a solution." His green eyes held hers, unflinching. "You pretend to be mine, my mistress, my interest, my companion, and they will be too fascinated by that scandal to question anything else." Heat flooded Amelia's face. "You're suggesting I become your—" "I'm suggesting nothing of the sort," he cut in, his tone clipped. "I'm suggesting a performance. You appear at my side at social functions. We allow society to draw their own conclusions. And in return, no one will dare ask about Mr. Thornton again." "But the scandal," Amelia protested weakly, even as part of her grasped desperately at the lifeline he was offering. "I would be ruined." "You are already ruined," Alexander said bluntly. "You have been married for 6 months to a man no one has met. The whispers have already begun. Give them a scandal they can understand. A beautiful woman and a duke, and the mystery of your missing husband becomes merely a footnote." The music swelled around them. Amelia felt dizzy, whether from the dance or his proximity or the sheer audacity of his proposal. She could not say. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me? We barely know each other." Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. "Let's simply say I have my reasons," he replied. "Do you accept?" Amelia looked past his shoulder at the ballroom full of people who had been whispering about her moments ago. Lady Pemberton stood near the refreshment table, her face tight with displeasure. Others watched with undisguised fascination. She thought of James drowning in debt, of her empty purse and emptier future, of Geoffrey Thornton, whoever he truly was, who had stolen what little she had and left her with nothing but a legal fiction. "Yes," she whispered. "I accept." Alexander's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Good. Then we begin now." When the waltz ended, he did not release her immediately. Instead, he kept her hand in his and led her from the dance floor toward the terrace doors. The gasps and whispers followed them like a wake. "Your Grace," Lady Weatherby intercepted them, her expression hovering between scandal and delight. "Surely you're not—" "I am escorting Mrs. Thornton to take the air," Alexander said coolly. "The ballroom is stifling. I'm certain you understand. It was not a request for permission." He simply continued walking, and Amelia, her hand still trapped in his, had no choice but to follow. The terrace was blessedly empty and cold. Amelia gulped in the night air, trying to steady herself. "They will talk," she said quietly. "That's the point," Alexander replied. He released her hand and moved to stand at the balustrade, looking out over the darkened garden. "By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be discussing the Duke of Ashford's mysterious interest in Mrs. Thornton. By tomorrow evening, speculation about your absent husband will seem pedestrian in comparison." Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "And when they ask you directly about your intentions toward me, I will tell them to mind their own affairs," he said flatly. "As I always do." She studied his profile in the moonlight. Alexander Blackwood was handsome in a harsh way, all sharp angles and controlled power. He was 33, she knew, though he carried himself with the gravity of someone much older. He had inherited his title at 19 when his father died, and had spent the subsequent 14 years building a reputation as a brilliant political strategist and a man utterly without sentiment. "They call you Winter," Amelia said quietly. "I know." He turned to face her. "Does that frighten you? Should it?" "Most women find me intimidating," he observed. "You seem merely confused." Amelia surprised herself by almost smiling. "I'm too desperate to be frightened, Your Grace, and confusion is my constant companion these days." Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but perhaps thawing by a degree. "You may call me Alexander," he said. "If we are to convince society of an attachment, formality will seem odd." Alexander, she tested the name, felt dangerous in her mouth. "And you may call me Amelia." Amelia. The way he said it, precise and considered, made her name sound different. Important somehow. "We should establish some terms." "Terms?" "Boundaries," he clarified. "You will accompany me to social functions as needed. We will appear in public together often enough to establish the connection in society's mind. But there will be no physical relationship. This is a practical arrangement, nothing more. Relief and something else. Perhaps disappointment, though Amelia immediately suppressed that thought, washed through her. "I understand. You will have an allowance," he continued. "Enough to maintain appropriate lodgings and dress suitably for the events we'll attend. I will not have you looking like a pauper while playing the part of my companion." "I can't accept your money," Amelia protested. "You can and you will," he said flatly. "This arrangement serves my purposes as well as yours. Consider the allowance compensation for your participation." She wanted to ask what purposes a duke could possibly have for acquiring a pretend mistress, but something in his expression warned her not to press. "Not yet." "How long?" she asked instead. "How long must we maintain this performance?" Alexander was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Until it no longer serves either of us," he said finally. "Or until you wish to end it. The choice will be yours." "Mine? You are not a possession, Amelia," he said, and there was unexpected steel in his voice. "Whatever else this arrangement is, it is voluntary. You may walk away at any time." The sincerity in his tone surprised her. She had expected calculation, coldness, the ruthless pragmatism he was famous for. But this felt like something else. Something almost like respect. "Thank you," she said softly. He inclined his head. "We should return. We've been absent long enough to be noticed, but not so long as to be improper. There's an art to managing scandal, and excess is as damaging as insufficiency." As they walked back toward the ballroom, Alexander paused. "One more thing," he said. "If your husband should reappear—" "He won't," Amelia said with more certainty than she felt. "Men like Geoffrey Thornton don't return to their victims." "Nevertheless," Alexander continued, "if he does, you will tell me immediately." "Understood." There was something protective in his tone that made Amelia's throat tighten. "Understood." They re-entered the ballroom together, and the effect was immediate. Conversations faltered, fans still. Every eye tracked their progress as Alexander led her not to the sidelines but to the center of the room, claiming 2 glasses of champagne from a passing footman. He handed her one, and their fingers brushed. The touch was brief, but he held her gaze as if the moment meant something. "To new arrangements," he said quietly, lifting his glass. "To survive," Amelia countered. His mouth curved in what might almost have been a smile. "Perhaps they're the same thing." They drank, and Amelia felt the weight of the entire ballroom's attention pressing down on her shoulders. But for the first time in 6 months, she did not feel alone beneath it. Lady Pemberton approached, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace, Mrs. Thornton. What a unexpected pairing." "Is it?" Alexander's tone was arctic. "I find Mrs. Thornton quite remarkable. Intelligent conversation is so rare in these gatherings. One treasures it when found." It was a calculated insult to everyone else in the room, delivered with perfect courtesy. Lady Pemberton's smile grew tight. "Of course, Your Grace. And Mr. Thornton? Does he share your appreciation of his wife's conversation?" The trap was obvious. Amelia felt her stomach drop. Alexander's expression didn't flicker. "I have never met the gentleman," he said coolly. "His loss, I should think. Now, if you'll excuse us, I've promised Mrs. Thornton a tour of the gardens." He guided Amelia away before Lady Pemberton could respond, his hand firm at her elbow. "That was dangerous," Amelia whispered as they moved through the crowd. "Now they'll assume." "Exactly what we want them to assume," Alexander finished. That I am interested in. That your husband is irrelevant. That you are under my protection. But, trust me, Amelia, he said, and the use of her Christian name in public was its own declaration. I know how this game is played, and I assure you, I play to win. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shocked glances and whispered speculation. Alexander remained at her side, not constantly but often enough to make his interest clear. He danced with her twice more, scandalous in itself. He brought her refreshments. He engaged her in conversation that, to Amelia's surprise, was genuinely engaging. You read philosophy? He asked at one point, responding to a comment she'd made about Locke. My father had an extensive library, she replied. It was one of the few things creditors couldn't easily sell. I read everything I could while managing his household. Unusual for a young woman. Useful for a desperate one, she countered. I learned early that understanding human nature, even theoretical understanding, was necessary for survival. He studied her with what might have been approval. You're more pragmatic than I expected. And you're less cold, Amelia said before she could stop herself. Alexander's expression shuddered. Don't mistake performance for warmth, Amelia. I am exactly as cold as they say. Remember that. But as the evening drew to a close and he escorted her to her modest carriage, he handed her a card with an address. My solicitor, he said. Call on him tomorrow. He'll arrange your allowance and handle any complications that arise from our arrangement. Complications? Your brother's debts, for instance, Alexander said. I assume they remain outstanding? Amelia stiffened. How did you? I make it my business to know everything relevant, he said simply. Consider the debts settled. It would be inconvenient for my companion's brother to be arrested for non-payment. I can't let you. It's already done, he interrupted. The instructions were sent this afternoon. This afternoon. Before he'd even approached her. Before she'd agreed to anything. Why? Amelia asked again, searching his face for answers. Why are you doing this? For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her. Something moved behind his carefully controlled expression. Something raw and quickly suppressed. Because, he said finally, everyone deserves at least one ally in this world, even if that ally comes with conditions. He handed her into the carriage himself, a gesture so courtly it seemed to belong to an earlier age. Tomorrow evening, he said, Marshaw's musical. I'll send a carriage for you at 7. It was not a question, but Amelia found she didn't mind. Tomorrow, she agreed that as her carriage pulled away, she looked back through the small window. Alexander stood in the street, watching her departure, his tall figure stark against the lamplight. He looked unutterably alone. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, and Amelia was left with far more questions than she'd started the evening with. Who was Alexander Blackwood? Really? What wounds had made him into Winter? And why, when he could have any woman in London, had he chosen to protect a desperate widow with a scandalous secret? She had agreed to pretend to be his. But as the carriage rattled through the London streets toward her shabby lodgings, Amelia realized that pretending might be the most dangerous thing she'd ever done, because already, after only one evening, she found herself wanting the pretense to be real. The following evening, the carriage Alexander sent for her was far finer than anything Amelia had ever ridden in. The seats were velvet, the interior lamps crystal. The coachman wore Ashford livery, dark green and silver, and handed her up with a deference that made her acutely aware of her inadequate wardrobe. She wore her best evening gown, a lavender silk that was 3 years out of fashion and showed signs of careful mending at the hem. Beside the carriage's opulence, she felt like a sparrow trying to pass for a peacock. Alexander was waiting when the carriage arrived at Marshaw House. He stood apart from the other guests, his evening dress impeccable, his posture radiating the controlled power that made other men give him a wide berth. When he saw her descend from the carriage, something flickered in his expression. You need a new wardrobe, he said without preamble. Amelia stiffened. I am dressed appropriately for You are dressed like a woman trying not to be noticed, he interrupted. That may have served you before, but it won't serve you now. Tomorrow you'll visit Madame Devereux on Bond Street. I've already sent word. She'll outfit you properly. I will not be dressed like a courtesan, Amelia said, her voice sharper than she intended. Alexander's eyes narrowed. You will be dressed like a woman of taste and means. There is a difference. Madame Devereux is respectable. She dresses duchesses and countesses. She will ensure you look like a woman whose company I would seek. Not. He trailed off. Not a pauper? Amelia finished, hurt despite herself. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Not invisible, he corrected quietly. You have been trying to disappear, Amelia. That ends now. He offered his arm. After a moment she took it. The Marchand musical was exactly as tedious as such events usually were. Amelia had attended dozens before her father's death. They were the preferred entertainment of families who could not afford to host balls but wished to be seen as cultured. What was different this time was the attention. Previously, Amelia had been background decoration, a penniless gentleman's daughter of no particular interest. Now, entering on the Duke of Ashford's arm, she was the center of every gaze. Whispers followed them through the drawing-room. Fans fluttered with increased vigor as they passed. Young ladies stared with undisguised envy mixed with scandal-tinged fascination. Alexander guided her to seats near the front. Another subtle declaration. Companions and mistresses sat in the back. Wives and favored guests sat at the front. You're making a statement, Amelia murmured as they settled into their chairs. I'm making several, Alexander replied. Pay attention to the music. Mrs. Marshall will be devastated if her daughter's performance isn't properly appreciated. The performance was actually quite lovely. Miss Marshall had genuine talent at the piano, and her singing voice was sweet if not powerful. Amelia found herself relaxing slightly, losing herself in the music. It was during the interval that the first direct confrontation occurred. Lady Ashcroft, a formidable dowager who had once been a friend of Amelia's late mother, approached with the determined stride of someone preparing for battle. Alexander, she said, ignoring all protocol by using his Christian name. I would speak with you, privately. Then you'll be disappointed, Aunt, Alexander replied coolly. I'm afraid I'm engaged for the evening. And Amelia hadn't realized Lady Ashcroft was family. The dowager's sharp eyes fixed on Amelia. So I see. Mrs. Thornton, is it? Margaret Hartley's daughter. Yes, my lady, Amelia said, surprised to be remembered. Your mother was a sensible woman, Lady Ashcroft continued. She would be distressed to see her daughter entangled in this. Her gesture encompassed Amelia and Alexander both. Aunt. Alexander's voice dropped to a dangerous register. You will mind your tongue. I will not, Lady Ashcroft snapped. Alexander, you are not a foolish man. Why are you courting scandal with a woman of dubious? Finish that sentence, Alexander interrupted, and you will find yourself uninvited from Ashford House for the foreseeable future, permanently if necessary. The threat hung in the air. Lady Ashcroft looked between them, her expression troubled. I worry for you, nephew, she said more quietly. This is not like you. You've spent years building a reputation for absolute propriety. Why throw it away now? Perhaps, Alexander said, his hand finding Amelia's and holding it firmly publicly. I've grown tired of propriety. Or perhaps I simply find Mrs. Thornton worth the price. It was a performance, Amelia reminded herself. He was playing a role. But his hand was warm around hers, and the conviction in his voice sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Lady Ashcroft studied them for another long moment, then sighed. You are making a mistake, Alexander, but you always were stubborn. She turned to Amelia. Your mother deserved better than this for you, child. She swept away before Amelia could respond. The silence she left behind felt heavy. I'm sorry, Amelia said quietly. I didn't mean to cause a rift between you and your family. You didn't, Alexander replied. Aunt Margaret has been trying to control my choices for 14 years. She will adjust or she won't. It makes little difference to me. But Amelia saw the tightness around his mouth, the slight rigidity in his shoulders. It made a difference. He simply wouldn't admit it. The second half of the musical passed without incident, but afterward, as they waited for the carriages, a gentleman approached whom Amelia recognized with a sinking stomach. Lord Pemberton, Lady Pemberton's husband and one of her father's gambling companions. Ashford, he said with false joviality. Didn't expect to see you at such gatherings. Musicales aren't usually your preferred entertainment. Tastes change, Pemberton, Alexander replied neutrally. Apparently so. Pemberton's gaze slid to Amelia. Mrs. Thornton, such a surprise to see you. Thriving. After your father's unfortunate passing. The implication was clear. She had no right to be thriving, not with her father's debts unpaid and her brother following the same path. Lord Pemberton, Amelia said, keeping her voice steady. I trust your family is well? Well enough. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I was just thinking the other day about that last game with your father. He owed me nearly £200 when he died. Never settled that debt. Amelia's face heated. My father's estate is bankrupt, yes, Pemberton interrupted. But family debts are family debts. Your brother's been adding to the tally rather nicely. Between the two of them, the Hartleys owe me near £500 now. Then you should present your claim to young Hartley directly, Alexander said, his voice like ice, rather than harassing his sister at a social function. I'm simply making conversation, Pemberton protested. Though I confess, I'm curious how Mrs. Thornton is managing to maintain her position in society. Her husband's mysterious business ventures must be quite profitable. The trap was neatly laid. Either Amelia defended her fictitious husband and invited further scrutiny, or she remained silent and looked guilty. Mrs. Thornton's circumstances, Alexander said quietly, are none of your concern, Pemberton. In fact, I'll tell you plainly. Anyone who troubles Mrs. Thornton troubles me, and I am not a man you wish for trouble. The threat was unmistakable. Pemberton paled slightly. I meant no offense, Your Grace. Of course you did, Alexander replied. But I'm a generous man. I'll overlook it once. The £500 young Hartley owes you, consider it paid. My solicitor will settle with you tomorrow. Pemberton's mouth opened, then closed. That's unexpected. Generous, Your Grace. It's practical, Alexander corrected. I dislike outstanding debts cluttering my attention. Consider it handled. He guided Amelia away before Pemberton could respond, his hand firm at her elbow. You shouldn't have done that, Amelia said when they were out of earshot. £500 is inconsequential, Alexander finished. Amelia, I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. The cost is nothing. The message, that you are under my protection, is everything. But now they'll be certain that I'm your mistress, Amelia protested. Good, Alexander said flatly. That's what we want them to think. The carriage arrived. Alexander handed her up, then surprised her by climbing in after her rather than riding separately. I'll see you home, he said, settling across from her. These evening events often run late, and your neighborhood is not entirely safe. Amelia felt embarrassment color her cheeks. He knew she lived in shabby lodgings in an unfashionable part of town. Of course he did. He seemed to know everything. They rode in silence for a few minutes, the swaying of the carriage oddly intimate in the darkness. Why do they call you Winter? Amelia asked suddenly. Alexander's gaze shifted to her, unreadable in the dim light. You've heard the rumors, I assume? That you're cold, heartless, that you feel nothing. Then you have your answer. But is it true? Amelia pressed. Or is it another performance? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. When I inherited at 19, I was young and foolish and grieving my father. Certain people saw that as weakness. Certain people attempted to take advantage. Financially, politically, socially. I learned quickly that sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford. So I became what I needed to be. Cold. Unmoved. Winter. That doesn't answer my question? Amelia said softly. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Doesn't it? You paid my brother's debts, she pointed out. You're protecting me from scandal. Those aren't the actions of a heartless man. They're the actions of a practical one, Alexander corrected. You serve a purpose for me, Amelia. I'm simply ensuring my investment is protected. But there was something in his tone, a slight edge that suggested he didn't quite believe his own words. The carriage stopped outside her modest lodging house. Alexander descended first and handed her down himself rather than waiting for the coachman. Tomorrow, he said. Madame Devereux at 2 o'clock. Don't argue. I wouldn't dare, Amelia said with a hint of humor. You're quite terrifying when you issue commands. Good. You're learning. But his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, and in the lamplight, his expression was softer than it had been all evening. Good night, Amelia. Good night, Alexander. She climbed the stairs to her rooms, acutely aware of him watching until she was safely inside. Through the window, she saw his carriage remain for several minutes before finally rolling away into the night. Amelia sank onto her narrow bed and tried to make sense of the evening. Alexander Blackwood was an enigma wrapped in performance, wrapped in carefully maintained coldness. But beneath all of it, she was beginning to suspect there was something else. Something wounded and hidden and perhaps lonelier than anyone realized. She thought of his hand holding hers in public. His immediate protection when Pemberton had threatened. The way he'd looked at her during the musical, when he thought she wasn't watching. Not with desire exactly, but with something almost like wonder. This was supposed to be a pretense, a practical arrangement to solve her problems and serve his mysterious purposes. But Amelia was beginning to fear it was becoming something else entirely. The following weeks established a pattern. Alexander collected her for social functions 3 or 4 evenings a week. He ensured she was seen at the opera, at dinners, at balls, always at his side, always under his obvious protection. The scandal was immediate and spectacular. By the end of the first week, the entirety of London was buzzing with speculation about the Duke of Ashford's mysterious companion. By the end of the second week, it was accepted that Amelia was his mistress. Strangely, this improved her social position rather than destroying it. Women who had pitted or dismissed her before now sought her company, hoping for insights into the enigmatic Duke. Men who had ignored her paid attention now, though none dared approach too closely with Alexander's implicit claim hanging over her. And no one asked about Geoffrey Thornton anymore. The mythical husband had been completely eclipsed by the reality of the Duke. When Amelia explained his absence now, people simply nodded knowingly, as if they understood perfectly why a woman might prefer Alexander's company to her husband's. Madame Devereux had indeed outfitted her properly. Amelia now possessed a wardrobe of remarkable gowns, each one elegant but not showy, fashionable but not ostentatious. Exactly the sort of clothing a wealthy gentleman might provide for a favored companion. You look like yourself now, Alexander had said when he saw her in the first of the new gowns. A deep emerald silk that brought out the color in her eyes. Not like someone hiding. Amelia had stared at herself in the mirror and realized he was right. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman with means and confidence. It was remarkable what fine clothing and a powerful protector could do for one's bearing. But it was the private moments that confused her most. After social events, Alexander often rode in the carriage with her back to her lodgings. During these rides, he would ask her questions about her childhood, her education, her thoughts on politics and philosophy and literature. You have an unusual mind, he observed one evening after she'd offered an opinion on the Corn Laws that apparently surprised him. Most women in your class avoid political topics. Most women in my class are taught that their opinions don't matter, Amelia countered. I was too busy trying to save my family from ruin to worry about propriety. And now I'm pretending to be the mistress of a duke, she said wryly. I think I've moved beyond propriety entirely. He'd almost smiled at that. Almost. There were other moments too. Small gestures that seemed to slip past his careful control. The way his hand would find the small of her back when guiding her through crowds. The manner in which he angled his body to shield her from overly curious stares. The careful attention he paid to her comfort, ensuring she had refreshments, that she wasn't standing too long, that no one troubled her when he stepped away. "You're very protective of someone engaged in a practical arrangement," Amelia observed one evening at Lady Pemberton's dinner party. Alexander's expression had shuddered. "Old habits," he said dismissively. "I protect my investments." But his hand had remained at her back even after she was safely seated. It was at the Devonshire house ball, exactly 1 month after their arrangement began, that something shifted irreversibly. The ball was one of the grandest events of the season. Everyone who mattered attended. Alexander had insisted Amelia wear one of her finest new gowns, a midnight blue silk that whispered against her skin when she moved. "You'll be scrutinized tonight," he'd warned in the carriage. "The Devonshires set the tone for society. How you're received here will determine how you're treated everywhere else." Amelia's hands had twisted in her lap. "And if I'm not received well, you will be," Alexander had said with absolute certainty. "Because I'll ensure it." He'd been correct. When they entered the ballroom, the Duchess of Devonshire herself greeted them warmly. "Ashford, how lovely to see you emerging from your self-imposed isolation. And Mrs. Thornton, what a charming gown. You must tell me the name of your modiste." It was an endorsement, subtle but unmistakable. If the Duchess of Devonshire approved, others would follow. The evening had proceeded smoothly until Amelia excused herself to the ladies' retiring room. She was returning through a quiet corridor when she heard voices, male voices, speaking in the low tones of men who believed themselves unobserved. "Can't believe Ashford's taken up with Hartley's daughter, though he had better taste." Amelia froze. The voices were coming from a partially open door to what appeared to be a smoking room. "Perhaps he doesn't know about the husband," another voice replied. "Though how he could miss it, I can't imagine. The woman's been parading around claiming to be married for months. The mysterious Mr. Thornton." The first voice was heavy with sarcasm. "I heard from Cartwright he looked into it. There's no record of the man anywhere. No business dealings, no property, nothing. The woman probably invented him to avoid being labeled a spinster. Or she's actually married and the husband abandoned her." A third voice joined in. "Either way, it's rich that Ashford's so taken with her. Winter falling for a woman who's either a liar or abandoned goods." Amelia's face burned. Her hands clenched in her skirts. "Careful," the second voice warned. "Ashford's not a man to cross. Ashford's not here," the first voice countered. "And besides, what's he going to do? Call me out over his mistress? Please, she's convenient company, nothing more. He'll tire of her soon enough. Unless she's cleverer than we think," the third voice mused. "Gets herself with a child, claims it's his. Suddenly convenience becomes an obligation. Ashford's too smart for that trap," the first voice said confidently. "Mark my words, within 3 months she'll be yesterday's scandal, and he'll have moved on to some other entertainment." Amelia couldn't bear to hear any more. She turned and fled back toward the ballroom, her heart hammering, tears burning behind her eyes. She'd known, of course, that people were talking. She'd known the arrangement was temporary. But hearing herself discussed so callously, hearing her worth reduced to convenient company and entertainment, it struck deeper than she'd expected. She nearly collided with Alexander as she re-entered the ballroom. "There you are," he said. Then his expression sharpened. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Amelia lied, trying to school her features. "I'm merely tired. Perhaps we should—" "Amelia!" His hand caught her elbow, firm but gentle. "What happened?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Alexander's eyes narrowed. He glanced around the ballroom, then guided her out onto the terrace, the same terrace where this had all begun 1 month ago. "Tell me," he commanded quietly, so she did. She recounted the conversation, leaving nothing out. By the time she finished, Alexander's expression had gone from concerned to absolutely glacial. "Names," he said flatly. "Which men were speaking?" "I don't know," Amelia admitted. I couldn't see them, only heard. Describe the voices. She did her best. When she mentioned one voice's particular aristocratic drawl, Alexander's jaw tightened. Wilmington, he said. And probably Carstairs and Houghton with him. Worthless wastrels, all three. It doesn't matter, Amelia said, trying to sound unconcerned. They're right, aren't they? This is temporary. You will tire of the arrangement eventually. They're simply stating the obvious. They're insulting you, Alexander corrected, his voice hard. And they're wrong. Are they? Amelia looked up at him, something breaking inside her. Alexander, be honest with me. What is this really? Because I've spent a month pretending, and I thought I could keep it separate, the performance from reality, but I can't. I can't hear myself discussing like I'm nothing and pretend it doesn't hurt. Alexander stared at her for a long moment. Then, abruptly, he stepped closer, his hand rising to cup her face. You are not nothing, he said, his voice rough. You are not convenient entertainment. You are… He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. I am what? Amelia whispered. You are… He began again, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The first person in 14 years who has made me forget to be winter. Her breath caught. Alexander… I told myself this was practical, he continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. I told myself I was helping you because it served my purposes. But the truth is, Amelia, I've been half in love with you since that first night when you looked at me like I was someone who could save you. And I wanted… God help me. I wanted to be that person. You were… Amelia said, tears slipping free now. You are. I'm a fraud, Alexander said harshly. I let you believe this was a pretense because I was too much of a coward to admit the truth. But hearing you recount those men speaking about you like you're disposable… His hand tightened against her face. It made me realize I can't maintain the pretense anymore. Not with you. What are you saying? Amelia asked, afraid to believe what she was hearing. I'm saying, Alexander said, his green eyes intense in the moonlight, that I don't want to pretend anymore. I'm saying that I want this to be real. I'm saying… He stopped, drew a breath. I'm saying I love you, Amelia, and I have no idea when pretending became feeling. But it did. And I can't take it back. Amelia's world tilted. But I'm married, she whispered. I'm legally bound to a man who abandoned me. I can never truly be yours. Then we find him, Alexander said fiercely. We find Geoffrey Thornton or whatever his real name is, and we make him dissolve the marriage or we prove it fraudulent. Parliament can grant a divorce or we get the marriage annulled. There are ways, Amelia. I will move heaven and earth to find them if you… He stopped again, suddenly uncertain. If I what? Amelia prompted. If you feel anything for me beyond gratitude and necessity. He finished quietly. Amelia laughed, the sound breaking on a sob. Alexander, you impossible man. I've been falling in love with you for weeks. Every carriage ride, every conversation, every moment you've protected me or made me laugh or looked at me like I matter. I'm utterly, hopelessly in love with you. The expression that crossed his face was wonder mixed with relief, mixed with something so tender it made her chest ache. Amelia, he breathed. Then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was 14 years of loneliness meeting 6 months of desperation, meeting 1 month of growing feeling that neither had dared name. It was hungry and deep and absolutely devastating. Amelia's hands fisted in his coat, pulling him closer. His arms wrapped around her, one hand tangling in her carefully arranged hair. The world narrowed to just this, his mouth, his body pressed against hers, the thundering of both their hearts. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. We can't go back in there, he said roughly. Not with you looking thoroughly kissed and me unable to think of anything except doing it again. Amelia laughed shakily. What do? We leave, he decided. Immediately. Let them speculate. I don't care anymore. He took her hand and led her not back toward the ballroom but toward a side exit. Within minutes, they were in his carriage, and Alexander had given orders to return to Ashford House, not her lodgings. Your reputation, Amelia began, is already destroyed by association with me, Alexander interrupted. And I want you somewhere safe while we sort out the Geoffrey Thornton situation. Ashford House has more than enough rooms. You'll stay there. Alexander, I can't. You can, he said firmly. You will. I'm done with half measures, Amelia. I'm done pretending to feel nothing. You are going to be my wife properly and legally, and until we can make that happen, I'm going to ensure you're protected and cared for. Do you understand? You're very autocratic when you're in love, Amelia observed, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last quarter hour. I'm very autocratic in general, Alexander corrected. You'll learn to live with it. Will I? He pulled her close, tucking her against his side. I certainly hope so, he murmured into her hair, because I have no intention of letting you go. Ever. Amelia closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, into this unexpected safety, into a future that had seemed impossible mere hours ago. The men in the smoking room, she said quietly. What will you do about them? Ruin them, Alexander said matter-of-factly. Socially, financially, whatever is most expedient. No one insults you without consequences. That seems excessive. That seems necessary, he corrected. You are going to be my Duchess, Amelia. People need to understand what happens to those who disrespect you. My Duchess. The words sent a thrill through her even as reality intruded. I'm still married to Geoffrey, she reminded him. We can't simply. We can and we will, Alexander interrupted. I told you I will find a way. I have resources, connections, and sufficient determination to move through whatever legal obstacles exist. Trust me. Amelia looked up at him, at the determined set of his jaw, the fierce intelligence in his eyes, the protective strength in the arm wrapped around her. She trusted him absolutely. I do, she said simply, his expression softened. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me, for loving me, for not running when you discover what I feel. Where would I run to? Amelia asked. You've become my entire world, Alexander. I couldn't leave if I wanted to. Good, he said, and kissed her again, softer this time but no less consuming. The carriage rolled through the London streets toward Ashford House, toward a future that was uncertain and complicated and absolutely improper. But Amelia found she didn't care. She'd spent 6 months trapped in a false marriage, pretending to be something she wasn't. She'd spent 1 month pretending to be Alexander's mistress. She was done with pretense. This, Alexander's arms around her, his heart beating against hers, his love declared and returned. This was real, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Ashford House was magnificent in a way that made Amelia's breath catch. The townhouse occupied an entire block in Mayfair, all pale stone and soaring windows. Inside, marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and artwork worth fortunes lined walls covered in silk paper. It's too much, Amelia whispered as Alexander led her through the entrance hall. It's home, he corrected. And now it's yours as well. A stern-faced butler materialized as if summoned by thought alone. Your Grace, we were not expecting you to return this evening. Plans changed, Henderson, Alexander said. This is Mrs. Thornton. She'll be residing here as my guest. Prepare the blue suite, and ensure the staff understands she is to be treated with the same deference you would show my wife. Henderson's expression didn't flicker, though Amelia saw surprise flash briefly in his eyes. Of course, Your Grace. Will there be anything else? Privacy, Alexander said flatly, and discretion. Always, Your Grace. The butler bowed and disappeared, leaving them alone in the vast entrance hall. Your servants will talk, Amelia said quietly. Everyone will know I'm living here unchaperoned. They already believe you're my mistress, Alexander pointed out. This merely confirms it. And once we've dealt with Geoffrey Thornton, we'll marry and the gossip will evolve into something more respectful. He made it sound so simple. Amelia wanted to believe him. The blue suite turned out to be a series of connecting rooms decorated in shades of azure and cream. The bedroom alone was larger than her entire set of lodgings had been. "This is too much," Amelia repeated. "This is appropriate for the woman I intend to marry," Alexander corrected. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Amelia, I need you to understand something. I know this is moving quickly. I know there are enormous obstacles ahead. But I meant what I said earlier. I love you, and I am going to make this right." "How?" Amelia asked. "Alexander, you're talking about overturning a legal marriage. Even with all your power and influence." "I've already begun inquiries," he interrupted. "This afternoon, before the ball, I sent letters to investigators I trust. They're looking for Jeffrey Thornton. If we can find him, we can force him to dissolve the marriage. If we can't find him, we'll find evidence the marriage was fraudulent. Bigamy, false identity, coercion. There are multiple grounds for annulment or divorce." Amelia stared at him. "This afternoon? But you didn't even know that I was going to declare myself." Alexander's mouth curved slightly. "No, but I knew I was going to eventually. It's been building for weeks, Amelia. Tonight simply forced my hand." "You're insane," Amelia said wonderingly. "You're trying to dissolve a marriage to a man we can't find, so you can marry a woman who's already ruined her reputation. This is madness." "This is love," Alexander corrected quietly. "I've spent 14 years being perfectly rational and absolutely alone. I'm done with being rational. I choose you, and the rest be damned." He kissed her forehead and stepped back. "You should rest. Tomorrow we begin untangling this mess in earnest. I'll have my solicitor draw up papers. We'll consolidate what we know about Thornton, and we'll find a path forward." "And tonight?" Amelia asked. Alexander's expression became carefully neutral. "Tonight you sleep in the blue suite, and I sleep in my chambers 3 doors down the corridor. We've already been scandalous enough for one evening." Amelia surprised herself by feeling disappointed. But she recognized the wisdom in his restraint. They were already courting enough gossip without adding fuel to the fire. "Good night, Alexander," she said softly. "Good night, my love." The endearment sat strangely on his lips, as if he wasn't quite accustomed to it yet. But the warmth in his eyes was unmistakable. Amelia slept poorly, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were a confused tangle of ballrooms and missing husbands and Alexander's green eyes watching her with an intensity that made her chest ache. She woke to bright sunlight and a maid gently shaking her shoulder. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but His Grace requested you join him for breakfast when you woke. He's in the morning room." Amelia dressed with the maid's help, choosing one of her simpler new gowns. As she descended the grand staircase, she tried not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer opulence surrounding her. This was Alexander's everyday world. Could she truly belong in it? She found him in a sun-filled room overlooking the gardens, reading correspondence at a small table laden with breakfast dishes. He looked up when she entered, and his entire expression softened. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "I didn't," Amelia admitted. "Too much thinking. I know the feeling." He stood and pulled out a chair for her. "Eat something. We have much to discuss." Over breakfast, Alexander laid out his plan with the methodical precision of a military campaign. "I've contacted 3 separate investigators," he explained, "each with different networks and methods. One specializes in finding missing persons, another in documenting fraud. The third has connections in less respectable circles where men like Thornton often operate." "You think Jeffrey is still swindling women?" Amelia asked. "I think men rarely change their methods when those methods are profitable," Alexander replied. "If he's continued in the same pattern, someone will have seen him or heard of him. We simply need to locate the right person. And if we can't find him, then we pursue other options. I've arranged a consultation with one of London's finest solicitors this afternoon. He'll review the details of your marriage and identify any grounds for annulment or petition to Parliament for divorce." Divorce. The word felt heavy. "Alexander, Even if we could obtain one, the scandal will be worth enduring, he finished. Amelia, I won't pretend this will be easy, but I am prepared to weather whatever society throws at us. Are you? Was she? Amelia thought of the whispers, the cut direct she would almost certainly receive from some quarters, the way her name would be dragged through drawing rooms across London. Then she looked at Alexander, at the absolute conviction in his expression, and realized the answer was simple. Yes, she said. If it means being free to be with you, yes. Relief flashed across his face. Good, because I've also taken the liberty of settling James's remaining debts. All of them. Your brother is no longer at risk of debtor's prison. Amelia's throat tightened. Alexander, you didn't have to. I did, he interrupted firmly. Because his troubles are your troubles, and your troubles are now mine. We're in this together, Amelia. All of it. Before she could respond, Henderson appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. Your Grace, I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation that requires your immediate attention. Alexander's eyes narrowed. What situation? A gentleman has arrived claiming to be Mrs. Thornton's husband. The room seemed to tilt. Amelia's vision grayed at the edges. Geoffrey, she whispered. Alexander was on his feet instantly, his hand gripping hers. Where is he? I had him wait in the entrance hall, Your Grace. He was rather insistent about seeing Mrs. Thornton immediately. I'll handle this, Alexander said, his voice hard. He looked at Amelia. Stay here. No. Amelia stood, her legs unsteady. If he's really Geoffrey, I need to face him. I need answers. Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded. Together then. But Amelia, stay behind me. They walked to the entrance hall side by side. With each step, Amelia's heart hammered harder. 6 months. 6 months of wondering, of fearing, of lying about a man who had stolen her trust and her future. The man waiting in the entrance hall turned as they approached, and Amelia's stomach dropped. It was Geoffrey, older perhaps, more worn, but unmistakably the man she had married. Amelia, he said, his tone carrying a strange mixture of relief and urgency. Thank God. I've been searching for you for months. Searching for me? Amelia's voice came out strangled. You left. You disappeared without a word. I had no choice, Geoffrey said. He took a step toward her, and Alexander immediately moved between them. Stay where you are, the Duke said coldly. In fact, I think you should explain yourself very carefully, Thornton, because you're moments away from being thrown bodily from my house. Geoffrey's gaze flicked between them, understanding dawning. I see. You found a protector. Clever, Amelia. Far cleverer than I gave you credit for. Explain yourself, Alexander repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Now. Geoffrey drew a breath, seeming to gather himself. I am not Geoffrey Thornton, he said. My real name is William Ashcroft, and I left because the people I was running from discovered I'd married Amelia. I fled to protect her, not to abandon her. That's absurd, Amelia said, but something in his eyes gave her pause. He looked genuinely distressed. It's not, Geoffrey, William insisted. I never meant to hurt you, Amelia. The marriage was real. My feelings were real. But I was being pursued by dangerous men. Creditors I couldn't pay. Men who threatened violence if I didn't satisfy my debts. When they learned I'd married, they threatened you. I left to lead them away. That's a touching story, Alexander said, his tone making clear what he thought of it, but entirely unverifiable. Why appear now if you were so concerned for her safety? Because the debts are settled, William said. A distant relative died and left me sufficient funds to pay what I owed. I've spent the past 4 months tracking down every creditor, settling every account. I'm free now, and I've come to reclaim my wife. The words hung in the air like a blade. No, Amelia said immediately. Even if I believed you, and I'm not certain I do, I don't want to be reclaimed. You left me, William or Geoffrey or whoever you are. You left me to explain your absence, to face society's questions, to manage alone. I don't care what your reasons were. You made your choice. I made the only choice I could, William protested. Amelia, please. I love you. I came back as soon as I was able. We're married. That has to mean something. It means, Alexander said with deadly calm, that you're legally bound to her, yes, but it doesn't mean she's bound to honor that tie, particularly given your deception and abandonment. William's expression hardened. With respect, Your Grace, this is between my wife and me. Your interest in her is noted, but she is mine by law. I have every right to take her home. You have no rights where she's concerned, Alexander countered. Not anymore. And if you attempt to remove her from this house against her will, you'll discover exactly how unpleasant I can make your continued existence in London. Are you threatening me? William's voice rose. I'm her husband. You're just the man who loves her, Alexander interrupted. The man who protected her when you abandoned her. The man who's going to ensure she never has to face your particular brand of love again. Amelia? William turned to her, his expression pleading. Tell him we have a marriage worth saving. Amelia looked at the man she'd married 6 months ago. She tried to find some remnant of the feelings she'd had then. Hope, gratitude, affection. But all she felt was anger and a bone-deep certainty that whatever they'd had was dead. No, she said clearly. I don't want to save it, William. I want to end it. I want a divorce or an annulment or whatever legal process will dissolve this marriage. If you truly love me, if you truly never meant to hurt me, then you'll grant me that. William's face went pale. You're asking me to give you up so you can be with him? He gestured at Alexander. I'm asking you to let me go, Amelia corrected. What happens after is my concern, not yours. I won't, William said flatly. I won't give you a divorce. I won't annul our marriage. You're my wife, Amelia, before God and law, and I intend to keep you that way. Then you're a fool, Alexander said coldly, because I will spend every resource at my disposal to break that marriage. I will hire the finest solicitors in England. I will petition Parliament. I will prove fraud or coercion or bigamy if such proof exists. And I will make your life in London so uncomfortable that you'll beg to grant her a divorce just to escape my attention. You can try, William challenged, but divorces require grounds. Abandonment might qualify, but I'd argue I left to protect her. Coercion? There was none. Fraud? The marriage was legal. You'll find yourself blocked at every turn, Your Grace. We'll see, Alexander replied. The two men stared at each other, the tension crackling like lightning. I'll return, William said finally, looking at Amelia. I'll give you time to reconsider. But know this, I won't give up my rights as your husband. Not for him. Not for anyone. He turned and left, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud. Amelia felt her knees buckle. Alexander caught her immediately, guiding her to a nearby chair. Breathe, he said quietly. Just breathe. He won't let me go, Amelia whispered. Alexander, what if you can't break the marriage? What if I'm trapped? You're not trapped, Alexander said fiercely. He knelt before her, taking her hands. Amelia, look at me. We will find a way. If he won't cooperate, we'll find grounds he can't refute. If Parliament won't grant a divorce, we'll find evidence to annul. And if all else fails... He stopped. What? Amelia asked. If all else fails, what? Alexander's jaw tightened. If all else fails, we simply live as if the marriage doesn't exist. You stay here with me. We build a life together regardless of what the law says. It won't be proper, it won't be conventional, but it will be ours. You would do that? Amelia asked wonderingly. Risk your reputation, your standing, everything, just to be with me? In a heartbeat, Alexander said without hesitation. I've spent 14 years building a reputation I don't particularly like. If I must tear it down to have you, so be it. Amelia pulled him close, burying her face against his shoulder. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything, he murmured into her hair. and I intend to give it to you. The following days were a blur of consultations with solicitors, meetings with investigators, and tense waiting. William had meant what he said. He refused to cooperate. He took lodgings in London and began making a point of attending social functions, referring to Amelia as his wife, making their legal connection impossible to ignore. The scandal was immediate and vicious. Society, which had been willing to accept Amelia as Alexander's mistress, was shocked to discover she was actually married. The whispers grew cruel. "She's deceived everyone," Lady Pemberton declared at a tea Amelia was foolish enough to attend, playing at being the Duke's companion while legally bound to another man. "It's disgraceful. It's adultery," another lady hissed. "She should be shunned." Amelia had left in tears, and Alexander had promptly paid a visit to Lady Pemberton's husband, after which the lady in question suddenly became far more circumspect in her commentary. But the damage was done. Invitations dried up. Former friends cut her in the street. Even the tradesmen who had been so deferential when she shopped with Alexander's credit became cool. "I'm destroying you," Amelia said one evening as they sat in Alexander's library. "Your association with me is ruining everything you've built." "Then let it be ruined," Alexander replied calmly. He was reading through legal documents, his expression focused. "Amelia, I've told you, I don't care." "But you should," she insisted. "Alexander, you're a duke. You have responsibilities, political connections, a position to maintain. You can't simply throw it all away for you." He looked up, his green eyes intense. "Watch me." He set the documents aside and came to sit beside her on the sofa. "Do you know what I realized this week?" he asked quietly. "What?" "That winter, cold, controlled, untouchable winter was never really me. It was armor. Protection against a world that seemed determined to take advantage. But armor is heavy, Amelia, and lonely, and now that I've let it slip around you, I can't imagine putting it back on." He took her hand. "You haven't destroyed me. You've freed me. Whatever comes next, scandal, ostracism, political ruin, I face it gladly if it means I get to be myself with you." Amelia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "And I love you, which is why we're not giving up." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. 3 weeks after William's reappearance, one of Alexander's investigators appeared at Ashford House late one evening, his expression grim but determined. "I found something, Your Grace," he said, spreading documents across Alexander's desk. "William Ashcroft, or Geoffrey Thornton, has been married before. Twice before, actually. One marriage in Scotland 5 years ago never dissolved. Another in Liverpool 3 years ago, also still legally binding." Amelia's heart leaped. "He's a bigamist?" "Multiple times over," the investigator confirmed. "I have marriage certificates, witness statements, and even located one of the previous wives. She's willing to testify." Alexander's expression was fierce triumph mixed with cold fury. "This is enough," he said. "More than enough. An existing marriage means his marriage to Amelia was never valid. It can be annulled immediately." "But he told me the marriage was real," Amelia said, trying to process this. "He seemed genuinely distraught about losing access to a wealthy protector through you," Alexander interrupted. "Think, Amelia. He appeared exactly when it became known you were under my protection. He's been attending functions, making sure people see him claim you as his wife. He's trying to extort me." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "He wants money," Amelia said. "He wants you to pay him to go away." "Precisely," Alexander said. "And he picked the wrong target." He turned to the investigator. "Find William Ashcroft and bring him here, tonight, and send word to my solicitor. I want papers drawn up immediately for annulment on grounds of bigamy." William arrived at Ashford House an hour later, escorted, practically dragged, by 2 of Alexander's bulliest footmen. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "I'm her husband. You can't simply kidnap me off the street." "Can't I?" Alexander asked mildly. You'll find I can do quite a lot when properly motivated. He gestured to the documents spread across his desk. These are marriage certificates. One from Edinburgh, dated 1810. One from Liverpool, dated 1812. Both bear your signature, William Ashcroft. Both marriages predate your supposed marriage to Amelia, and neither was ever dissolved. The color drained from William's face. That means, Alexander continued, his voice deadly quiet, that your marriage to Amelia is null and void. It never legally existed. You have no claim to her, no rights, nothing. You can't prove, William began. I can prove everything, Alexander interrupted. I have witnesses. I have documentation. And I have one of your previous wives prepared to testify in court. You're a bigamist, Ashcroft. At best, you're looking at public humiliation and social ruin. At worst, criminal charges. William's hands clenched. What do you want? I want, Alexander said, your signature on an annulment document acknowledging that your marriage to Amelia was fraudulent and never valid. I want a sworn statement that you have no claim to her now or ever. And then I want you to disappear from London and never trouble her again. And if I refuse, then I have you arrested for bigamy and fraud, Alexander replied calmly. Your choice, cooperation or criminal charges. Decide now. William looked between them, his expression trapped. This was never personal, he said finally. It was just business. Amelia supplied bitterly. Survival? How many women have you married and abandoned? William, I never hurt anyone, he protested. You hurt me, Amelia said quietly. You made me believe I was married when I wasn't. You stole 6 months of my life. You made me lie to everyone I knew. Don't tell me you didn't hurt anyone. William had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry, he said. Truly. But I was desperate. Creditors were. I don't care, Amelia interrupted. Sign the papers. Admit the truth. And leave. For a long moment, William stood frozen. Then his shoulders sagged. Where are the documents? He asked quietly. 2 hours later, it was done. William had signed the annulment papers, provided a sworn statement, and departed with enough money from Alexander to relocate far from London. Funds provided explicitly on the condition that he never contact Amelia again. Amelia stood in Alexander's study, holding the annulment document in trembling hands, trying to process that she was free. It's over, she whispered. It's over, Alexander confirmed. He crossed to her and gently took the document, setting it aside. Then he pulled her into his arms. You're free, Amelia. Legally, completely free. She buried her face against his chest, feeling 6 months of tension finally released. I can't, never, Alexander murmured. I would never have allowed it. Believe it. I was so afraid I'd be trapped forever. They stood like that for long minutes, just holding each other. Finally, Alexander pulled back just enough to look down at her. Amelia, he said quietly, I know this has been the most tumultuous few weeks imaginable, and I know I should give you time to recover, to process everything that's happened. But I find I can't wait any longer. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Amelia's breath caught. Alexander opened it, revealing a ring. Not flashy or ostentatious, but elegant. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in gold. This was my grandmother's, he said. She was, by all accounts, a formidable woman who married my grandfather against her family's wishes and spent 50 years proving them wrong. I hoped, it would be appropriate. He took her hand. Amelia Hartley, you are free of William Ashcroft. Free to make your own choices. And I am asking, begging, that you choose me, marry me, not because you need protection, not because you're desperate or trapped, but because you love me, and I love you, and because we deserve to build something real out of all this pretense. Tears were streaming down Amelia's face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, And it was nothing like the desperate kiss on the terrace weeks ago. This was different, tender and fierce and full of promise. When? Amelia asked when they finally broke apart. As soon as possible, Alexander replied. Special license. Small ceremony. I'm done waiting, Amelia. I want you to be my Duchess immediately. The scandal. It will be monumental, he agreed. And worth every moment. Let them talk. Let them whisper. We'll face it together. Amelia looked down at the ring on her finger, then backed up at Alexander. At the man who had saved her when she was desperate, who had protected her when she was vulnerable, who had loved her when she thought herself unworthy of love. Together, she agreed. Always. They were married 4 days later in the private chapel at Ashford House. The guest list was small. Alexander's Aunt Lady Ashcroft, despite her earlier objections, had softened and attended with her blessing. James, Amelia's brother, was there, looking healthier and more sober than she'd seen him in years. A few of Alexander's closest friends. The servants who had quietly become allies during Amelia's stay at Ashford House. Amelia wore a gown of ivory silk that Madame Devereux had created in a remarkable 2 days. Simple but elegant, it made her feel like a bride rather than a woman entering her second fraudulent marriage. Except this marriage was anything but fraudulent. As she walked down the chapel aisle toward where Alexander waited, she saw his expression transform. Winter melted entirely, leaving only a man looking at the woman he loved with an awe that made her throat tight. "You're beautiful," he murmured when she reached him. "You're biased," she whispered back. "Completely," he agreed and smiled. Not the cold half-curve she'd seen so often, but a genuine smile that lit his entire face. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Alexander kissed her with a tenderness that made several guests sniffle. The wedding breakfast was held in Ashford House's formal dining room. It was during the toasts that Lady Ashcroft rose, surprising everyone. "When my nephew first took up with Mrs. Thornton," she began, "I thought him a fool. I feared he was throwing away everything he'd built for a moment's infatuation." Alexander's expression remained neutral, though Amelia felt his hand tighten on hers under the table. "I was wrong," Lady Ashcroft continued. "What I saw as recklessness was actually the first wise choice Alexander has made in 14 years. Mrs. Thorne, Lady Ashford," she corrected herself, "you have done what none of us could. You reminded my nephew that he is human. That feeling is not a weakness. That love is not a luxury but a necessity." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Welcome to the family, niece, and thank you for bringing him back to us." The toast echoed around the table. Amelia felt overwhelmed by the acceptance, the warmth, the sudden sense that she truly belonged here. After the breakfast, as guests began to depart, James pulled Amelia aside. "I've been a terrible brother," he said without preamble. "I let you shoulder all of Father's failures. I added to your burdens rather than helping carry them. And you never once reproached me for it." "James, let me finish," he interrupted. "I've joined a support group, men who struggle with gambling addiction. His Grace Alexander. He's paid for my lodging at a supervised house where I can't access funds without approval. He's also found me employment as a clerk in a merchant's office. Honest work, boring work, but safe work." He took her hands. "I'm going to get better, Amelia. I'm going to become someone you can be proud of. Someone worthy of the sister who sacrificed everything to try to save me." Amelia hugged him tightly. "I'm already proud of you," she whispered. "Just stay on this path. That's all I ask." That evening, as the last guests departed and the servants retired, Amelia found herself alone with Alexander in their private chambers. She was nervous in a way she hadn't been with William. That wedding night had been obligatory, awkward, colored by desperation. This was different. This was a choice. This was love. Alexander seemed to sense her tension. He pulled her gently into his arms. "We don't have to," he began. "I want to," Amelia interrupted. "I'm just nervous. The last time I was with a man who abandoned you, Alexander finished. I know, and I need you to know, this is not that. This is us. This is real. And if you need more time, Amelia silenced him with a kiss. I don't need time, she said against his mouth. I need you. Only you. What followed was tender and passionate by turns. Alexander was patient, attentive, careful of her comfort even when his own desire was obvious. And when they finally came together, Amelia felt something inside her that had been broken since William's betrayal finally began to heal. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Alexander's fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. I love you, he murmured. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I love you, Amelia, my Duchess, my wife, my heart. Amelia turned to face him, pressing her palm against his cheek. I love you too, and I need you to know what we just shared. It wasn't just physical. You healed something in me, Alexander. Something I thought was permanently damaged. His arms tightened around her. You healed me too, he said quietly. I didn't even realize how cold I'd become until you walked into my life and reminded me what warmth felt like. They talked long into the night, about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Alexander told her about his father's death, about inheriting young and frightened and determined not to show weakness, about the loneliness of building walls to protect himself, only to realize he'd built a prison instead. Amelia told him about her father's slow decline, about watching a good man be consumed by addiction, about her own fears that she'd inherited his weakness, his inability to protect those he loved. You're nothing like him, Alexander said fiercely. You're strong, Amelia, stronger than you know. You survived abandonment, scandal, public humiliation, and you never broke. You bent, yes, but you didn't break. I bent because I had you, Amelia replied. You were my support, Alexander. My strength when I had none left. Then we'll be each other's strength, he decided. Whatever comes next, scandal, gossip, challenges, we face it together. Together. Amelia agreed and kissed him again. The scandal, when it finally emerged in full, was exactly as enormous as Alexander had predicted. Society was torn between outrage and fascination. The Duke of Ashford, Winter himself, had married a woman whose previous marriage had been declared void due to bigamy. He'd done so with unseemly haste, showing open affection, utterly disregarding propriety. It should have ruined them both. Instead, something unexpected happened. The truth about William Ashcroft's pattern of defrauding women came to light. The investigator Alexander had hired ensured the story reached the newspapers, not in crude scandal sheets but in respectable publications, framed as a cautionary tale about confident men preying on vulnerable women. Amelia transformed from questionable woman to innocent victim almost overnight, and Alexander's devotion to her, his willingness to fight for her, to risk everything for her. It captured the public imagination in a way his cold perfection never had. The Duke of Ashford has proven himself capable of passion, one society columnist wrote. For 14 years we knew him as Winter, cold, controlled, untouchable. But love, it seems, has thawed even the most frozen heart. In championing Lady Ashford, in fighting for her freedom, in making her his Duchess against all convention, the Duke has become not less but more admirable. The invitations returned, hesitantly at first, then with increasing warmth. It helped that the Duchess of Devonshire chose to call on Amelia personally, a gesture of acceptance that influenced the rest of society. You've made him happy, the Duchess observed during tea at Ashford House 3 months after the wedding. I've known Alexander since he was a boy. I've never seen him like this, at ease, almost jovial. It's remarkable what love can do. He's made me happy as well, Amelia replied. I didn't think I could be after everything that happened. But he's shown me that the past doesn't have to define the future. The Duchess smiled. You're good for each other. That's obvious to anyone with eyes. The true test came 6 months into their marriage, at the season's most prestigious ball, hosted by Lady Pemberton of all people. Amelia hadn't wanted to attend. She's been the cruelest of all the gossips, she pointed out to Alexander. Why give her the satisfaction of our presence? Because, Alexander replied calmly, we have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. We attend as equals, as the Duke and Duchess of Ashford, and we show the entire town that their whispers have no power over us. So they went, and they entered the ballroom exactly as they had the very first night. Together, Alexander's hand at her back, their connection obvious and unapologetic. The effect was immediate. Conversation faltered, people turned, and then, unexpectedly, the crowd parted. Lady Pemberton herself approached, her expression carefully neutral. Your Graces, she said, curtsying. How delightful that you could attend. Amelia waited for the cut, the snide remark. It didn't come. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton continued, addressing Amelia directly. I wonder if I might beg a private word later this evening. I have something I wish to say to you. Alexander's hand tightened protectively on Amelia's waist. Anything you wish to say to my wife can be said to both of us. Lady Pemberton's mouth twitched. Very well. Your Graces, I owe you an apology. Specifically, I owe Lady Ashford an apology. I was cruel when she was vulnerable. I contributed to gossip that was both unfounded and unkind. I allowed old prejudices about her father's debts to color my judgment of her character. I was wrong. The admission was delivered stiffly but seemed genuine. Around them, other guests had drawn close enough to hear. I appreciate your honesty, Lady Pemberton, Amelia said carefully, but I confess I'm curious what prompted this change of heart. Your husband did, Lady Pemberton replied. He had a conversation with Lord Pemberton that was illuminating about the nature of judgment and the consequences of cruelty. And then I saw how devoted he is to you, despite the talk, despite the scandal. It made me examine my own behavior and find it wanting. She paused, then added more quietly, You're fortunate, Lady Ashford, to have a husband who would move heaven and earth for you. Most of us are not so blessed. The sadness in her tone spoke volumes about her own marriage. Thank you, Amelia said gently. And I accept your apology, Lady Pemberton. Shall we simply move forward? Relief flashed across the woman's face. I would like that very much. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of acceptance and warmth. Amelia danced, not just with Alexander, though he claimed her for several waltzes, but with other gentlemen who sought her out, their wives watching without censure. During one dance, as Alexander swept her around the floor, he leaned close. You're magnificent, he murmured. Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last hour, Amelia replied with mock seriousness. I was beginning to feel neglected. He smiled, that full, genuine smile that still took her breath away. Then allow me to correct that egregious oversight. You are magnificent. You are brilliant. You are courageous. And you are mine. Possessive, Your Grace. Amelia teased. Utterly, he agreed unapologetically. And you love it. She did. She loved everything about this. The dance, the acceptance, the feeling of safety and belonging she'd never quite had before. Do you remember, she asked, the first time you asked me to dance? When you whispered, pretend you're mine? I remember, Alexander said. I also remember thinking that pretending wasn't going to be enough. That I wanted it to be real even though I barely knew you. And now, he said, pulling her slightly closer than was strictly proper. You are mine, not through pretense but through choice. And I am yours, completely, always. When the waltz ended, he didn't release her immediately. Instead, he stood there in the middle of the dance floor, holding her, looking down at her with such naked love that several ladies sighed audibly. Alexander, Amelia whispered, aware of all the eyes on them. We're making a scene. Good, he replied. Let them see. Let everyone see that I love you. Let there be no doubt in anyone's mind that you are my Duchess, my wife, my heart. Then scandalously he kissed her, right there in the middle of Lady Pemberton's ballroom, in front of half of London society. The gasps were immediate and shocking. But beneath the shock, Amelia heard something else. Approval, delight, even applause. When they finally broke apart, Alexander took her hand and led her from the floor. They didn't stay for the rest of the ball. They simply left, together, heads high, while behind them the whispers transformed from scandal to romance. "That was incredibly improper," Amelia said once they were in the carriage. "I know," Alexander replied, utterly unrepentant. "I don't care. People will talk. Let them. As long as they talk about how much I love you, I'm perfectly content." Amelia laughed and leaned into him. "What happened to Winter? To the cold, controlled Duke of Ashford?" "He melted," Alexander said simply. "You melted him, Amelia, and I have no desire to freeze again." 1 year later, Amelia stood in the nursery at Ashford House, watching Alexander hold their infant daughter with the careful reverence of a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "She has your eyes," he murmured, staring down at the tiny bundle in his arms. "She has your stubborn chin," Amelia countered. "Poor child," Alexander said with mock sorrow. "Doomed to be obstinate." "Coming from you, that's rich," Amelia replied, but she was smiling as she moved to stand beside him. Leaning against his shoulder, their daughter, Eleanor, named for Alexander's beloved grandmother, yawned and stretched, her miniature fingers curling and uncurling. "She's perfect," Alexander said quietly. "You're both perfect. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I'm grateful every moment." "You saved me," Amelia said simply. "When I had nothing and no one, you appeared like something out of a story and offered me exactly what I needed." "I'm no hero, Amelia," Alexander protested. "You're mine," she countered. "My hero, my love, my Duke." He turned his head to kiss her temple, careful not to disturb Eleanor. "Do you ever think about that first night? When I asked you to pretend?" "Constantly," Amelia admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how desperate, how certain I was that I'd lost everything. And now," she looked around the nursery, at the beautiful room they'd prepared together, at the daughter they'd created out of love, at the life they'd built from pretense and scandal and impossible circumstances. "Now," she said, "I know I've found everything." 2 years after that, at another ball, this one hosted at Ashford House itself, Amelia stood at the edge of the ballroom watching Alexander dance with Eleanor, now a precocious 3-year-old in a miniature gown. Their son, Thomas, slept peacefully in the nursery upstairs. James, her brother, stood across the room looking healthy and happy, engaged in earnest conversation with a merchant's daughter he was courting. Lady Ashcroft held court near the refreshment table, telling anyone who would listen about her remarkable niece by marriage. The guests were a mix of old society and new friends, people who had proven themselves worthy during the scandal, and others who had learned from their earlier judgment. Lady Pemberton approached, her expression warm. "Your Grace, this is a magnificent ball, and your daughter is absolutely charming." "Thank you," Amelia replied. "And thank you again for your friendship, Lady Pemberton. It means more than you know." The two women had formed an unlikely alliance over the past years. Lady Pemberton had proven herself genuinely remorseful, and Amelia had learned that holding grudges served no one. "I still remember," Lady Pemberton said quietly, "that first ball when I asked about your husband, when I was so determined to humiliate you." "So do I," Amelia admitted. "I've thought about it often," Lady Pemberton continued, "about how cruel people can be when they sense vulnerability. I'm grateful you were willing to forgive me. Not everyone would have been so generous." "We all make mistakes," Amelia said gently. "What matters is what we do after." Across the room, Alexander caught her eye. He smiled, that full, unguarded smile she'd learned meant he was completely happy, and bowed to Eleanor before steering her in Amelia's direction. "Mama," Eleanor called as they approached. "Papa says I'm the best dancer in all of England." "Papa is biased," Amelia replied, scooping her daughter up. "But you are quite good." Alexander's arm slipped around her waist, the three of them forming a small unit in the midst of the crowded ballroom. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. Deliriously, Amelia replied, "Good, because I have something for you." He handed her a small wrapped package. Amelia shifted Eleanor to her hip and opened it carefully. Inside was a miniature portrait. Alexander, Amelia, Eleanor, and baby Thomas, painted with exquisite skill. "It's us," she breathed. "It's our family," Alexander corrected. "I wanted something tangible. Something that shows exactly what we've built from that first night when I asked you to pretend." Amelia felt tears burn behind her eyes. "It's perfect. We're perfect. We're imperfect," Alexander countered. "But we're real, and we're ours." Eleanor squirmed to be put down, spotting her cousin across the room. As she scampered off, Alexander pulled Amelia close. "Dance with me," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Always," Amelia replied. They moved onto the floor, and just like that first night, the crowd made space for them. But this time there were no whispers of scandal. Only smiles. Only approval. Only the general warmth that accompanied a love story everyone had witnessed unfold. "Do you remember?" Amelia asked as they waltzed. "What you said that first night? Pretend you're mine?" "I remember every word," Alexander replied. "I'm glad I don't have to pretend anymore," Amelia said softly. Alexander's arms tightened around her. "Neither am I. You are mine, Amelia. Not through pretense or performance or social maneuvering. Through choice. Through love. Through every moment we've shared and every moment we have yet to come." "And you're mine," Amelia replied. "My impossible, wonderful, formerly frozen duke who melted for me." "Only for you," he confirmed. "Always for you." The music swelled around them. Beyond the ballroom windows, snow began to fall, soft and gentle and beautiful. Inside, warmth and light and love filled every corner. Amelia looked up at her husband, at Alexander, who had once been winter and was now warmth itself, and smiled. Once, she had been desperate, trapped, certain her life was ending. Now, wrapped in his arms, surrounded by family and friends, secure in a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable, she knew better. Her life wasn't ending. It was blooming, and every moment of struggle, every hardship, every tear had been worth it to arrive here. In his arms, in her home, in the life they'd built together from nothing but determination, devotion, and the stubborn refusal to accept that love was impossible. They had pretended once, but what they had now was absolutely, perfectly, beautifully real. And they lived, as all the best love stories promise, happily ever after.